man has turned to the earth for his survival. Floods, diseases, droughts, the terrible wars that left the land scorched and devastated, man has met them all and still will survive. Always when disaster has threatened, man has found a way to conquer and survive. If man were weak, if man were lacking in ingenuity, intellect, and courage, he would have been wiped out centuries ago. As the Cold War of the atomic age moves into the space age, there are new threats that call for new measures. We've heard a lot about the horrors of nuclear war. Some of what we hear is true, some is frightening, and some is unrealistic. It's not that we aren't concerned about nuclear war, rather that we understand too little and fear too much. Let's see how one family decided to meet this threat. Several weeks ago, Pennsylvania dairy farmer Hugh Wilson attended a meeting held by his county agent, Bob Martin. For purposes of illustration, let's assume a 10 megaton burst at the surface. We know that a 10 megaton burst will probably destroy most of the brick and frame houses within a radius of 10 miles. But the radioactive fallout will contaminate an area probably 200 miles downwind, a strip about 20 miles wide. Thus our original blast, initial radiation, and heat will affect an area of perhaps 500 square miles. But the fallout will contaminate an area of about 5,000 square miles. Thus we see our blast, heat, initial radiation affect a small area, but our radioactive fallout covers a large area. And when it comes to radioactive fallout, we can do something about that. Because we can protect ourselves. You can protect yourself against radioactive fallout. There are actually three types of protection. Time, because radiation has a fairly rapid rate of decay. The longer it takes fallout to reach an area, the less radioactive it is. Distance, because the radiation exposure is less the further away you are from the source. But you can't count on either time or distance, so shielding is your safest bet. And shielding is simply a mass of material between you and the radiation. It can be lead, steel, concrete, brick, or earth. The thicker and heavier the shield, the better the protection. But the shielding must surround you completely, overhead as well as on all sides, because radiation could come from all directions. The Wilson farm, like many farms, already has some built-in protection. With a few simple and relatively inexpensive modifications, the Wilsons could have a well-protected farm. As we start our tour around the Wilson farm, it would be a good idea to keep in mind the possibilities on your farm and in your home, and think about what could be done to increase the protection. Hugh Wilson has asked Bob Martin, his county agent, to look over his farm for suggestions on additional protection. First, Hugh and Bob look for the best spot for the family shelter. Hugh has a couple of possibilities in mind, but wants advice on how much protection he needs, what changes to make, what improvements are needed. The logical place to begin is the basement, since most basements have some built-in protection. In the basement, Hugh almost has a natural for a fallout shelter. Notice the section we picked for the shelter is at a right angle from the basement entrance. This location would prevent any radiation coming in through the door from hitting the shelter, since radiation travels only in straight lines. The The Wilsons also have solid concrete walls below ground with no outside openings, except this one window, which can be easily filled with earth. There is an additional bonus in the shelves already stocked with food, all ready for any emergency. Your own shelter area may not be as perfect as the Wilsons, but every farm and every home has a safe area that can be made even safer. There is no quick answer to protection from nuclear attack, but there are some answers. It's up to you to take a positive step, maybe just a small one at first, but one that will start you and your family on the road to comparative security in the nuclear age. Another shelter possibility Hugh had in mind is this room under the granary, 10 feet wide, 21 feet long, completely surrounded by stone walls with a double ceiling above. You'll notice there are no windows, and the only door leads into the barn. Another advantage to this kind of family shelter, Hugh could leave the shelter to care for his livestock without risking exposure to the outside radiation danger. The shelter needs to be cleaned up, maybe a coat of whitewash to make it more attractive. It needs to be stocked with enough food, water, medicine, clothing, cots, and other necessary supplies to last the family for 2 weeks. Probably wouldn't be necessary to stay inside the full 2 weeks, but it's a good idea to be prepared just in case. Most of you will not be as lucky as Hugh Wilson, but you should learn enough to do the best with what you have. There are many types of shelters. An underground shelter covered by 3 feet of earth gives excellent protection. An improvised shelter in a basement will also give good protection if you bank all windows and exposed walls. Find the safest place on your farm. It may be a root cellar, or a corner of your basement, or a storm cellar. Shield the doors, windows, and other openings with concrete blocks or bricks. This can be done simply and inexpensively. What about the livestock? A few years ago, Hugh Wilson built a new addition to his barn. This part provides excellent shielding against radiation. 12-inch concrete block construction and good, tight construction with practically no air leakage. This air vent would present no problem. Very few radioactive particles could filter through. The glass windows are the only real problem in this section. Radiation would pass right through the windows to the livestock. But this is easily solved because we simply pile concrete block up the windows. This stops the radiation and greatly increases the safety. The ceiling gives excellent protection. 4-inch solid concrete with an 8-inch web of additional thickness, which simply adds more protection. Let's suppose your barn doesn't have a concrete ceiling. Suppose you have wood and you need additional protection. How would you get it? Let's go above this new section and see what kind of protection we have from the top. Notice the distance from the roof to the floor, approximately 40 feet. This distance alone would give you some protection below. There are several steps you can take to add to the protection. Most wooden floors would hold several bags of fertilizer or lime piled horizontally, or 20 feet of baled hay, or 4 feet of grain. Any one of these could be added to give you increased safety. This older part of the barn would not offer much protection, but it could be made adequate. The walls are 8-inch concrete with the back wall below ground. This end, because it's completely unprotected, could be piled to the top with concrete block. Place the concrete blocks so, all the way to the top. We also block the windows. Either concrete block or brick can be used. There is practically no protection on this roof, so we should try to get twice as much protection on the side. This will help to offset the lack of protection from above. Another method of increasing protection if block or brick is not available. This trench silo with the open side toward the barn could be made into a good shelter. It would give excellent protection with any of these simple additions. A steel arch placed over the top, lumber placed over the top to give support, and 3 feet of earth on top of the lumber. These are especially good suggestions if the trench silo is no longer used. A number of farm facilities can be adapted to serve as some kind of shelter. Keep in mind that concrete buildings give better protection than wooden buildings, but a good, tight wooden barn could reduce the radiation by 1/2. A picture of it is a 2-story basement-type barn with a hay-filled loft. Remember, put your best animals in the best shelter you have. You have thought out a minimum expense. Most of the materials used are ones usually found on farms. A few extra hours of labor, and the Wilson farm becomes a safeguard in case of nuclear war. Each farm will have different problems and somewhat different solutions, but every farm and every family can be protected from radioactive fallout with simple, inexpensive measures. If this nation is ever involved in nuclear war, its ultimate victory will depend heavily upon your ability to survive, to sustain yourself, and to provide the food needed for the entire country. Hugh Wilson is doing his part. What about you? You can provide yourself and your family with a measure of security in the nuclear age by protecting your home and your farm. The information is available free from your county agent or civil defense director. Study the pamphlets, then take the necessary protective steps. Find your safest place so that when your country needs you, you will be ready.